Hello, everyone. Welcome and good morning. My name is Roger Snyder, and I'm the VP of Marketing at 280 Group. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Today, we're going to be discussing one of the foundational elements of what makes a product management team successful. Does everyone understand what the PM team does and how product decisions get made? I'm excited that Kenny Kranzler has joined us this morning to talk about this important topic. He is a principal consultant and trainer with 280 Group and a part-time instructor for the Product Management Certificate Program at the University of Washington. He has extensive experience in building, developing, and leading product management teams at innovative enterprises like Amazon and Microsoft, and unicorn-ready startups across the Pacific Northwest. He also spent time in a completely different kind of business, working at Kentucky Fried Chicken, or these days known as KFC. Thank you for being with us today, Kenny.
Thank you, Roger. I'm looking forward to it. It should be a fun discussion.
Absolutely. Now, you are up in Seattle today, right?
I am, and it's actually sunny out. So what they say about raining every day doesn't quite hold true up here.
So our roles are reversed because it's raining here. I'm in Scotts Valley, sunny California, and we're getting some much needed rain. Quite frankly, it's been raining for the last few days, which is wonderful. We need that for sure. All right, let's do a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First off, we love to have you engaged in our product management community. So join our LinkedIn group on product management leadership. The link should be pasted into our chat box, so for your easy access. Thank you, Nicole, for taking care of that. So join our community where you can share with your peers the greatest thinking. You'll see updates from 280 Group, but also just a lot of good sharing of ideas and concepts from the entire community. All right. And at 280 Group, we love interacting with you, not just in the forum, but here as well. So during this webinar, we encourage you to ask questions or give feedback. If I remember, I will try to invite you to add questions several times throughout. And you can use the questions box on the right of your screen to type in questions or comments at any time. We'll leave time at the end for us to get through as many questions as we possibly can. Now, the most popular question is, so I want to answer it right now, can I watch this webinar later? And the answer is yes. All attendees will receive a link to view the webinar in a follow-up email after this recording has ended. Another question typically is, can I get a copy of the slides? And the answer to that one is no, because there are some copyrighted materials that we share, and we're not at liberty to distribute them. But you will be able to get the link to the webinar, and that should help you be able to review your favorite aspects of what we talk about today. All right, let me tell you just a little bit about 280 Group. We are passionate about product professionals, and our mission is to empower product professionals with the knowledge and tools to build products that matter. Products that matter to your customers, most of all, but products that matter to your company as well, and products that matter to you as a product manager. We do this by helping both individuals and teams get better at product management through the fullest set of services available. And like I said, we are helping both individuals who want to improve their skills. We're also working with teams who want to transform their teams and kind of up the overall efficiency of the product management team. So to learn more, go to 280group.com. All right, so we are continuing our product management leadership series, and today's installment is about how to transform your team. Maybe, there we go.
Yeah, okay. Here we go, yeah.
Yep, one more to get the animation there. And yeah, we are talking about how you're able to help as a leader or as an individual. We have a lot of individual product managers attending today. We'll talk about that in a second, but how to build up your team and transform it to be ever more efficient in conducting product management and building those products that matter. So let's take a look at our audience today. We looked at the results of folks who had registered as of last night, and nearly half of the group today is product managers and product marketers, but we have a great almost 25% representation of directors of product management or product marketing, or VPs of product management or marketing. And we still have a smattering of other folks, product owners who are curious about some of these things as well, certainly, and then other folks that are probably curious about the product management discipline in general. So a good mix today, Kenny.
Yeah, we do have a good mix of folks. It sounds great. So whether you're participating as individual contributor or leading a team of product management, I think you'll find some value from understanding what your role is and how that fits with others in the organization.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get into the meat of the presentation. I'll stop talking and let Kenny take over.
Thank you so much, Roger. So what we'll do in this section really is talk about the role of the product manager and how we can get agreement on what a product manager does, doesn't do, and how that aligns with some of the related roles that they have within the organization, as well as thinking more broadly, how we can get the entire organization focused on taking active responsibility in decision-making, especially with regard to products and product decisions, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with a poll for those of you who are product managers or related product managers, right? So what I'd like to do is for you to get an understanding how clear your role is, if you will, right? So if you can answer the poll that's coming that Nicole's posting now, I believe my role as a product manager is well understood by me and the organization, clear on what I need to do, but not necessarily to others in the organization. That there's overlap with one or two others in the organization. Sometimes there's conflict on who owns what, who should do what. Or lastly, that changes depend on the day. And I often feel like a janitor cleaning up everybody's messes as a product manager.
Right,
Let's
right.
see how the results come out.
We talk about this product janitor feeling quite a bit in our courses, that's for sure. And on the overlap one, there's always going to be overlap. It's the conflict part that we're getting at on that third answer. Like if you're overlapping in an unhealthy way versus overlapping in a healthy way, that's kind of what we're talking about on that third one, right?
Yeah, sometimes there's shared responsibility, and that's a good thing, right? Because other multiple people, but is there a constant conflict where people are stepping on each other all the time?
Right, exactly. And we pull open for just another second or two. We're almost up to like about 75% participation, which is awesome. Thanks everyone for votes. And yeah, let me close out the poll now and look at the results. And I'll hit share. Here we go.
All right.
So anyway, we have got, the distribution that I would kind of expect.
Yeah.
7% say well understood by me and the organization. So unfortunately,
that's why they're here today, I guess, Raj.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's why we're going to here to help you. 22% clear on what I need to do, but not to others in the organization. And then the biggest response was in this overlap with conflict. 46% of our audience said overlap with others, conflict on who owns what. And then a full 25%, it changes depends on the day. And I often feel like a janitor. So there's definitely that issue going on.
Yeah, so you got a quarter of the folks thinking they're janitors out there cleaning up everybody's messes.
Right.
Doesn't sound like fun. No, so hopefully we can help y'all with that, right? And our goal is hopefully at the end of this discussion that we have, you at least have a path to say where is some of that overlap and how do I manage that overlap and work through that overlap? And then ultimately, how do I get to the point where we have clarity on who's responsible for what activity and then who's responsible for what in a decision-making process?
Right. Good.
So let's start. Let's jump in, right? So a couple things. Developing great businesses or a great product proposition, it really comes down to about three things that come together as you do it, right? First, you need to understand the market that the business or the product plays in. And what are some of the dynamics of that market? In particular, who's the customer and user? And what do they need to solve the products that they may encounter? Secondarily, you need to translate the understanding of those needs into the products that you develop to ensure there's a fit between what's needed and what you actually build. Essentially, you're creating products that fit the needs of the market. And then thirdly, you need to make sure that you convince customers to purchase or for digital products subscribe to what you just created. Mm-hmm. That is, you need to create a business proposition and a marketing strategy that drives value for the business and for the customer.
Yep. All three are essential.
And so within the enterprise, we tend to have specific roles that support these three activities, right? So for defining the customer and user and their needs, we often have someone, a user experience team, if you will. Mm-hmm. And for actually building those products, we have an engineering team or a development team or a technology team that actually works on building those products for us. And when we think about the business around the product, we tend to have a sales and marketing team that's focused on building that proposition for the product, if you will. However, most businesses, they need to have a group that sort of shepherds all these requirements to ensure that that overall product comes together in a coherent manner. And that is largely the role of the product management team, where all this comes together. We ensure that we're creating products that meet the needs of the markets and our customers. And we have a business proposition that ensures that the product's effectively sold and the business prospers. Sounds simple, but I think you can see from this picture, there's inevitable conflict overlap that arises when we start defining these roles and who's responsible for what task or tasks.
Yeah, and it's a lot to do, right? To be this coordinator in the middle of these different areas.
Yeah, so you're sitting in the middle of people who are focused on their specific piece, and you're really bringing all those pieces together, if you will.
Right.
So what does that role of product manager look like, right? Ideally, that product manager, there's someone who understands both the corporation's business strategy and the structure of the market that the product competes in, and uses that understanding really to conceive of innovative business concepts that drive value for both customers and the enterprise. And that product manager doesn't necessarily own the implementation of that product proposition to software or hardware, but he or she has a clear understanding of what the product requirements are to fulfill the needs of the customer. And they use that knowledge to drive appropriate trade-offs. So the team's being smart in developing a roadmap for the product that ensures we're delivering the highest value in the most judicious and expedited manner possible.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think, when I present this slide and I'm teaching class, the one that trips up people a lot is the presents needs instead of, to your point, not presenting the implementation or the solution.
Yeah. You clearly need to understand the needs and what are the enterprise's capabilities in doing that. And maybe where do we have to have a third party involved in the process, because it's not necessarily us that's providing it, but what's the value and what's the delivery chain that gets it out there?
Right, good point. Right, but the more a product manager can be focused on the needs in the problem space, then the more effective they can be at unleashing their development and UX teams to come up with the right solution.
Yeah. Ultimately, you as the product manager, you're there for creating products that are valuable, differentiated, attractive, and provide a valuable business opportunity for the business, if you will. Right?
Excellent.
And it can get tricky because sometimes product managers are pulled in different directions, right? On the one hand, they're expected to be the market expert and accomplish all the tasks that sit on the left. On the other hand, they're counted to be the subject matter expert for their product and help the development team deliver their product working on the things on the right. And what happens, right, inevitably, is the product manager tends to get pulled towards the right side of this chart. These are the tasks that are usually pretty urgent. They need to be handled now to get something done quickly, right? The tasks on the left, they're less urgent, but they're critically important. They ensure that you're not only getting the things done on the right quickly, but you're doing them and accomplishing them correctly.
Yeah,
right?
The more time you spend on the left, the more effective you're going to be on the right.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you want to be an effective product manager, you're balancing both halves of this chart, right? Making sure that you're accomplishing the urgent tasks on the right, but doing so in a way that's properly informed by the important understanding of the marketplace, the voice of the customer, and the company's business strategy, right? From those things on the left. And it's all coming together.
Yeah, that's when it feels good, right? When it all comes together.
Yeah, it does feel good. But what I tend to find is most product managers that I talk to spend about 70% of their time on the right here and about 30% of their time on the left. What I'd really like to do is for most product managers, especially leading product managers, to flip that ratio where they're spending 70% of the time on the left and 30% of the time on the right, if you will.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the overlap and conflict that inevitably happens, right? We talked about that overlap before. And the first one is between the product manager and the product marketer, or the marketing team in general, if you will. And if one way to think about it is to consider the overall life cycle of a product or a product increment, if you will, right? In 280 group terms, we think of this as the optimal product process, right? You move from conceiving a concept to fit a business opportunity to starting to plan that initiative, to developing it, testing it, launching it, and eventually retiring it, right? That's the overall plan, if you will, right? And as you go through the process, you're really starting to move your thinking from how do I get the right product onto the shelves to how do I move that same product off the shelves and into customers' hands. The product management and the product marketer probably should be involved throughout this process, as the two roles tend to be like hand in glove, right? And both participate throughout the process at some level.
Right.
But it's really a matter of who takes the lead at different stages in the cycle, right? The product manager is probably taking the lead early in the process during the conceive and some of these early planning stages. Of course, with input assistance from the product marketer. And then it's the product marketer who's probably taking over as we move toward launch and sustainment of the product, driving the product with the sales team, of course, with input and assistance from the product manager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love this analogy that we use of the product manager's center of focus is get product onto the shelf, get the right product onto the shelf. And then the product marketing's center of gravity is getting the product off the shelf. There's often this like product managers is completely inbound and product marketing completely outbound. And there's some truth to that, but I actually prefer this analogy more effectively to describe the difference between these two roles.
Yeah, and I do like, the triangles here, right? Is that everybody's involved throughout the process. It's just a matter of how much of that triangle you're taking up, right? How big your triangle is at that stage in the process, if you will, right? Right. The product manager's owning what the product will do, whereas the product marketing manager's owning what we say about that product. And inevitably, in some organizations, they don't have product marketers, right? In that instance, it's often the product manager working closely with the marketing department or the marketing services department to ensure they're fully equipped to drive the correct messaging, branding, positioning of the product as it hits the market, right? So sometimes you take these things and you mush them together because your product manager is also the product marketer. Yes. No conflict, but a lot to get done.
Right. There's fewer conflicts because it's all in your one head, but there's a lot more work.
You got it. All right, so let's talk about another conflict that inevitably happens, right? With agile development methodologies, they started to take the product and technology world by storm. 280 Group did a study about challenges in product management, and they found that about 69% of teams are doing some form of agile, right? And that Scrum framework that comes out of agile includes this role called product owner, right? And it's naturally spawned a great deal of product owner versus product manager confusion and debate, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. One of the first things to note is that both of these are actually roles, not titles, right? And you may have the title of product manager and be acting as well in the role of product owner. So let's talk a little bit about where there are specific separate individuals filling some of these roles. But first, let's get an understanding of your organization, if you will, right? How are the tasks of product managers and product owners split at your organization, right? And it might be, hey, we don't use agile methodology, so we don't have a product owner, right? And it might be that most or all of our product managers are actually acting as product owners, right? Or there's a lot of debate about what product managers do versus what product owners do. Or lastly, we're pretty clear in our organization. We know what a PM does, we know what a product manager does, we know what a product owner does, and there isn't a lot of conflict, overlap, or confusion between those two roles.
Mm-hmm. So one of the first questions that we've already had, and we've had some good questions coming in already, Kenny. So one of the first questions we had was, can you please define product manager versus product owner from Simone? So hang on, Simone, we're almost there.
We'll get there.
It is definitely a source of confusion, as you can see. And we're getting folks' votes in right now to let us know how they feel about this particular issue. And when I'm training, this is always a interesting topic, right? Where people have and they really need help getting this sorted out. So good to see that we already had that question come in, and we were prepared for that. We've already seen this going on. All right, so we're almost up to 70% voted. So let me just give it another moment, and we will go and close the poll. And let's see, come on, click up just one more percent.
There you go, you get your 70.
Okay, exactly. All right, let me share the results with everybody. Okay, so Kenny, we had 15% don't use Agile and don't have a
Okay, so
product.
you don't have to worry about this. There you go.
So not an issue for them, right? But certainly something we'll we'll spend some time on this, but we'll spend time on other topics as well for those of you who don't have to deal with Agile. The
Yeah.
biggest response was number 2. Most or all our product managers take on the product owner role. So another
Yeah.
duality, right?
We'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah, it's something, it can be done in many organizations. It is done, and we'll talk about the situations at which it's optimal, or at least best practice, for a product manager and a product owner to take on the same role.
Right, so that's 39%. But close behind that, lots of confusion between what a PM and a PO does, 36%. And then
Okay.
last, clearly defined PM and PO roles, little conflict of overlap, 11%. So that's
Yeah.
at least
Yeah, some folks, yeah. Some folks
Yeah.
have solved this, and they don't need to listen at least for the next 5 minutes or so.
I don't know about that. I'm sure they'll pick something up. All right,
There you go.
and then now let's answer the question. What is this?
All right, let's answer it. Okay, so let's talk about product managers, right? So there is inevitable overlap between these roles, right? And some of the overlap really sort of needs to be negotiated between the individuals of the team as to who owns what tasks, right? So let's define it. So broadly thinking, though, come on, there we go. So broadly thinking, though, it's the job of the product owner to maximize the value of the product and the work being done by the development team, while it's the product manager who's responsible for driving the strategy and the overall success. So as we start to break out the responsibilities of the two, you can think of the product manager role as being more strategically centered and more externally or market facing, right? While the product owner role is more tactical in nature and likely more internal facing, if you will. And so as you think about it from our previous slide, some of the key responsibilities of the product manager role would include clearly understanding the market, including segmentation, competitive analysis, as well as some business analysis, including some things like forecasting, right? Or defining some of those augmented components of the product, and ultimately driving the realization of the business case, if you will. And the product owner, right? The requirements include defining what are the specific user stories and developing those into a backlog that's accepted by the development team as they start to work through some of their agile sprints and go from release to release to release, if you will. So those are clearly within the bailiwick of the product owner, if you will. And we think about what's in that overlap between the two, and this is the place that probably needs negotiation. It's really around some of the shared responsibilities, including planning the release. So when are the results of the sprint or set of sprints ready to be released to customers? As well as some of the things like defining the personas and positioning and being the advocate or the representative of the customer for that development team. And a lot of it is, even within the same organization, you may define it differently, because it comes down to what are the individual personalities and capabilities of the specific product manager or product owner. And that's how you define how you put some of these things together, right? So if you've got a fairly visionary product owner, if you will, maybe he owns a little bit more of the vision or think about release planning, right? Whereas in many instances, that might go to the product manager.
Yeah, a couple things here where I think it's not just about responsibility, but it's also being aligned, right? So the closer that the product owner and product manager share the vision and understand deeply the personas, the more effective both can be in their roles. One example I like to use is when I was working with remote resources in India, having the product owner be a part of the team locally in India meant that I had a meeting weekly between myself as product manager and that product owner to make sure that we were really aligned on business priorities, the vision of the product, and the personas that we were serving. So that when I was asleep, that product owner was properly driving the team towards creating the right business value. And they knew the long-term vision, they knew which way to head. So when the questions came up about should I do A or B, they know the vision, they know the roadmap, and they're able to then help guide the team moving in the right direction. So this is as much about getting the responsibilities right as it also getting on the same page and being a really effective team together.
Yeah, so no matter how you divide up these tasks between product manager, product owner, they do need to stay synchronized on things like what's the product, what's the vision, and what are some of the priorities in terms of release planning, right? Because I think ultimately the results of those shared responsibilities come down on the product owner and are driven by some of what the product manager is doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that combination product manager, product owner, right? Is, you know, and so because some of them assign it to one person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that can work sometimes. If you've got a product that serves as a component of a larger product, or serves as an internal product that's only used by employees, or you know, if it's a supporting product that serves external customers under the covers. In those instances, it might be more appropriate to fill both the product owner and the product manager role as one person. And part of the reason is that there's fewer market issues, there's fewer competitive issues, there's fewer pricing issues to consider. So some of those pieces that would be in the product manager role aren't there, and it's easier for the product owner to scale up, take responsibility, take control of all those shared responsibilities, and have fewer of those sort of market externally facing kind of scenarios, if you will.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Actually, in those circumstances, that makes perfect sense. And hopefully, some of the 39% of the folks who answered are in that bucket. But it is unfortunately true that oftentimes they're not. They have a full-on facing product and they're doing both roles, and that is definitely challenging. So maybe during the Q&A we can talk a little bit about how, well, when you're in that circumstance, what do you do, right?
Right. Yeah, they become workload challenges, I think, at that point, right? Because what happened, you know, you definitely have that challenge of what that right side, left side that we were talking about on the prior slide, right? Yeah. Of what you, the product manager, are pulled in the implementation direction. All right, so there's likely confusion and overlap between the product manager role and other roles in the organization, including things like a project manager and a program manager, a user interface manager, or a user experience designer, if you will. I'm not going to go into details on all of those overlaps, because I think there are some tools we can use to sort out some of those and get to a clarified role definition and ownership of tasks. As well as how some of those roles participate in the decision making. So I'm sort of going to blanket over some of those other conflicts with my discussion in the next two tools, if you will. And really, the tools that we're using in defining some of these other roles and clarifying decisions are called RACI and DACI, respectively. RACI is really the process of determining, clarifying the level of responsibility that the key roles have for crucial activities. So how much responsibility do they have for accomplishing and getting done a specific activity. And DACI can be used in conjunction with or separate from RACI. And that's really a process of taking those roles, and maybe others in the organization, and starting to define what part those roles have in getting key decisions made in the organization. And as I said, both are useful, can be used separately in combination. And I'll walk through a little bit on each, including what the acronyms mean and some tips for how you activate them. And I think we've got a gift for everybody at the end of the presentation. Right?
Yes, that's going to be very helpful.
Yeah. All right. So let's start with RACI, right? And it's an acronym that essentially stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, right? And a RACI chart is really a responsibility matrix of all the activities or decision-making authorities undertaken in an organization set against the people and the roles, right? And at the intersection of activity and role, it's possible to assign somebody as either responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed in the decision, right? And when you hear these types of comments in an organization, you probably may want to think about doing RACI analysis, right? My boss always overrules my decisions whenever she wants, right? The approval process for even the simplest items takes so long today, or it seems everyone's putting together a spreadsheet on the same data, or things are always slipping through the cracks, or I have the responsibility, but without the authority to get this job done.
Right.
Right. So what do these RACI categories mean, right? So what are these things that have, right? So responsible is the person who performs an activity or does the actual work. And accountable is the person who's ultimately accountable and has a yes, no veto authority for that activity. Consulted is someone who's a person that needs to feedback and or contribute to the activity. And lastly is the informed. That's the person who needs to know the results of the activity. You just need to know what happened, if you will. Now, when you're going through and starting to do this RACI analysis, there's sometimes confusion between the responsible person and the accountable person, right, in defining this matrix, right? That's usually where difficult challenges happen, right? And I like to sort of think of the differentiation as, the person who gets the R is the one who'll make sure that a piece of work gets done. Right? Yeah, so the R asks, when will I have time to do this work? What kind of resources would it take? When's it due, right? And sort of the anxiety of being in the R role is whether or not you can do whether or not you can do everything or do everything well, if you will, right? And if you as a person have too many R's, you're going to start to feel overwhelmed. One of the things about RACI to think about is there can be multiple responsible individuals, and this is you can have the R be shared between multiple roles in your organization, if you will, right? It can be, you don't want to have too many people that are R's, but you can have several even for specific tasks. Now the A role, that accountable role, right? He holds the authority in the system, right? And they have to approve a decision or determine if a particular task has been done well, right? So the kind of questions that an A might ask is, did the job get done? And did the job get done well, right? That person is going to exercise the judgment in making decisions, right? And the risk for the A role is simple but profound. Sometimes the wrong call is made, right? Right. If there's a problem in the quality of the overall program or the work, it's the failure of the A role because the buck stops here. Now, because of that, there's no sharing of the accountable role. For any activity, there should be one and only one person that's accountable for that activity, if you will. Right. So you don't want to have you're going to have one A for any activity out there.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So let's do a summary here, right? Here's a good summary and a way to think about the individuals across these roles. R is the doer, the A is the authority, and C needs to be kept in the loop and provide input during the activity, if you will. While that I only needs to be informed after a decision or after an action has taken place, if you will. Right, so it's a good way to sort of think about who are my RACIs and how do I assign them.
Right.
All right, so let's think about how we'd actually go create one of these RACI matrices, right? And so to illustrate RACI, I like to think of sort of a non-business example. It takes out some of the biases that we have and lets us focus more on the roles and responsibility, and it simplifies things a little bit. So I'm going to use an example from one of my favorite movies, Lord of the Rings, because I'm kind of a nerd. So if you remember, or if anybody knows about, probably this group does, Lord of the Rings, the team must ultimately create a fellowship to bring the ring that Frodo has discovered to its appropriate resting place atop Mount Doom. That's the activity, that's the initiative they're trying to move forward, right? And as you can see, Gandalf, who's the wizard, right? He's the authority figure on team, and he's accountable for many of the activities in taking care of the ring in this process. But he's really relying on Frodo and Elrond to be responsible for certain activities relating to creating the fellowship and administering to the ring. So they each they're the R's for those, and in some instances, they're actually sharing the R, right? So in creating the fellowship, both Elrond and Frodo are involved, whereas getting the ring to Mount Doom, Frodo's the responsibility person.
Right.
And Sam and Aragorn, they're consulted and they're involved in some of the activities that Frodo's responsible for. But they're responsible for doing the difficult work and distracting and defeating the enemies of the fellowship.
Right, they're in block and tackle roles, right?
Exactly, yeah. So they're involved. So you can see this is, for even a simple process of getting a ring to the top of a mountain, you can start to define roles and you can start to assign roles to activities, and you start to assign, what the level of responsibility that person might have, where they're involved in that process. Right, so this is a good example that I use. So here's more of more closer to a chart you might create for your organization. Right. Again, notice the major activities are the rows, with the key roles in the organization as the columns, and then we array across those activities with the roles defined for specific departments or titles in the organization. A couple of things to note about this chart, right? We don't have to have a role for each department in every activity, right? As in addition, there can be multiple R's for an activity, right? What I don't have on this chart, but is also available, an individual can actually serve multiple roles for an activity as well, right? You can be both a C or an I or an R and a C or those kind of things.
Right.
But also note that for any activity, there's going to be one and only one accountable person for any activity.
Right. That's crucial, certainly. Yeah, there's got to be one throat to choke, as is the other way that I have put it in the years past.
There you go.
Right. So we already have a question, Kenny, that I think we should take now while you have this slide up. Michelle asked,
Sure.
we have a clear RACI. It's not so much a question as a problem. We have some suggestions. We have a clear RACI, yet we continue to collide in these roles. And my first thought on that is, I wonder if the RACI is truly clear.
Someone's put it down. Someone's written it somewhere, but it's not bought into is usually what happens, right?
Right. And so my question would be, all right, in the areas where there are collisions, look more closely. And is it really clear, particularly the R and the A maybe and the C, of who really is responsible, who really is accountable, and who's expected to be contributing? And try to, maybe you have to double click there and split that out even a little bit more finely to try to avoid reducing the amount of conflict. That's what I have seen before, is you have a chart, and the other problem too is you have a chart and nobody follows it, right? So
yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that can happen. One is you have a chart and nobody follows it, they aren't bought into. The other is, and I think you're teasing at the point here, Roger, is sometimes these activities are defined at too high a level, right? So I can get responsibility, but there's actually multiple activities that make up this one activity, and that's where it should be split at that point, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So hopefully that helps, Michelle, but if not, let us know.
So if you're doing a RACI session, where you're defining the matrix and the assignment of roles in the matrix, you should, a couple of things to think about, right? Have a representative from each of the major functions that participate in the process involved, right? And make sure you reach consensus on all the accountabilities for sure, most of the responsibilities, right? And at least, and make sure you push the accountability down to the lowest decision points. Because the other thing I've seen on this is that, you put the most senior person in the room and they're the A's on everything, which isn't necessarily the right thing to do.
Right. And
then you might want to schedule a follow-up session from that initial workshop to start to get agreement and details on some of the exceptions that arise. And sometimes you need to, eliminate some of your C's and I's, if you will, if you have too many of those, right?
Good point. Yep.
And there's sort of, as a follow-up, there's a couple of levels of analysis you can do on this thing. There's what they call a horizontal analysis, where you look at a row and you look across it, right? So you take one specific row in this chart, right? And a couple of things to ask, right? If you find there's no R's, and that happens, right? Yep. Figure out, if that happens, the job may not get done, right? Someone's waiting to approve, or someone's consulting and they don't know what to approve, right? The other thing that happens is you go the opposite way. You've got everybody being an R, right? And that's where you wind up in the scenario that you're talking about, is you haven't really defined anything. You've just defined the conflict area, right? Yeah. The other thing that I've seen happen is we forgot to put an A down. Well, then there's no one to figure it out. Or the alternative is you've got two A's on a row. Don't do that, right?
Yeah.
It's better, have one, right? The other things that happen is people start to litter this with C's and I's, right? They're just all over the place. And it doesn't have to be, right? Make sure that, your C's truly need to be consulted before an activity is done. And your I's truly need to be informed after the job is done, right? You shouldn't have every box filled in on this chart. If you do, then you're doing too much.
Right, good point.
The other way to look at it is top down, right? Do a vertical analysis of this thing, right? And what are some of the challenges you can run into there, right? And some of the ones I've seen happen is let's give Johnny or Susie all the R's, right?
Right.
Right?
Yep.
That won't happen, right? The individual can't stay on top of all that stuff, right? Yeah. Make sure you break it up. Or you've got a person that doesn't have any empty spaces, right? Johnny or Susie is involved in everything, right? They suddenly become a roadblock at that point. And the next one is you may look vertically and you see the person has no R's and no A's along this process, right? Or the functional role has no R's and A's. Should that be a role or should that be folded into something else, right? Make sure that functional role makes sense, or make sure the process is changed to a point where resources need to be redeployed, right? And then the last one is, I've got too many A's, right? That usually tends to happen with, executive management has all the A's, and you're just creating bottlenecks because it means everything has to go through that person before it gets done.
Right, that can be a problem too, yeah. And that actually is a good segue into decision making.
Yeah. So thank you. So let's talk about DACI, right? And DACI, it's similar to RACI in that it defines roles for specific departments or titles in an organization. But DACI is about decision making, right? And clarifying the process of getting to and making decisions. Now it goes back, it's actually a Six Sigma concept for those people that know Six Sigma concept. And it's really about defining and empowering a driver, right? Who's the one that makes sure that decision is made and do it in a way that's streamlined with a single approver that prevents the decision from being shuffled around the organization and enables the decision making actually also to be pushed to that lowest level possible, if you will. Right? And so what we find is that, as organizations grow, decision making becomes harder and harder. And the tendency is for a lot of people being able to say no, and no one clearly being able to say yes and having it stick, right? And there are 4 options in DACI, right? And unlike RACI, one person can only have one setting, right? They can drive the decision forward, they can approve a decision, they can contribute to the decision, or they can be informed about the decision, right? They actually can't have multiple roles within it. They're going to have one of these 4 roles, if you will.
Yep, agreed.
And so here's the sample DACI chart, right? As I mentioned, here we have each square has only one possible setting. And here the goal is to be clear as to who drives the decision to closure and who finally approves it. And so a benefit of improving and completing this exercise for your company is that you can clearly see how decision making is transferred, and you can also clarify who actually gets to make a decision and who doesn't necessarily have some of that decision making authority, if you will.
Right. There were several questions in the chat about the conflicts or not being clear about R versus A in RACI. And I want to point out that getting this DACI chart filled out can actually help clear up some of that conflict between the R's and the A's in the RACI chart. When it becomes clear who's driving, who's going to present the idea, right? Like, hopefully the product manager owns pricing, but I've never seen a product manager be able to unilaterally say, this will be the price, right? So there's got to be an approver that is going to actually approve the price. And that approver, in some cases, like we have the first column, executive management, in this case, it might be a body, right? Like a gate review committee or the pricing committee, right? They're going to approve, but as long as that's clear that, yes, PM owns coming up with the pricing policy, and then the pricing, team is going to then actually, a pricing committee is going to actually approve. It makes it much clearer then for everyone how this is going to go.
For sure. All right, so let's build on that, Roger, right? So using DACI within RACI, right? So in comparing the two, and if you want to use both, one way to think about is RACI is about accountability, who does what, right? And DACI is about authority, right? So who has the power and input to make decisions? And in that same realm, RACI is about really stability, right? Understanding the roles and the responsibilities so they don't step on each other necessarily. And DACI is really about agility, right? Making sure we can drive decisions to closure and execute them more quickly, right? And I think both can be valuable, particularly in an organization that has some confusion about roles, particularly as it relates to product management, if you will.
And we just had the question come in from Steve. So what comes first, DACI or RACI?
It varies, and I don't think there's necessarily best practice. I tend to start with RACI first. Let's figure out who does what, and then we'll figure out who decides on what. I don't know what you think, Raj.
Well, I do think it iterates. I think you're right.
Yeah,
You can start with RACI first and then go to DACI. But I think as you're doing
come
DACI,
back something.
you're going to scratch your head a couple times and go, oh, wait a minute. If we're really going to do it this way, then we have to go back. And so I do think you're going to iterate a few times. There's also been
Yeah,
a couple of questions about, well, once this is done, is it set in stone? No,
no,
this is something that has to evolve over time. And you test this out, right? If you've never had this before, like any new process, you're going to put it into place, run it for a little while, and then you need to check in and see whether it's actually working and what needs to be tuned up. And there's going to
yeah,
be things you can think of. Some team members are going to feel like they're not engaged enough. Other team members are slowing things down, and you're going to have to tune that to get, like you said earlier in the RACI matrix, make it sparser, right?
yeah, right, yeah. Pull people out. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is an iterative process for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about best practices. I think that's a great segue, Raj. Right.
Oh yeah.
So how do you go about doing this in practice, right? A couple of things to think about, right? One is know this is a process, and it could take a bit of time to get it right. To your point, Roger, of you may need to iterate on it, you may need to play with, it. You'll start with an early process and then learn from it, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to get involvement from a variety of teams. I've seen a lot where RACI and DACI tend to fail is some department says, okay, I'm going to take control of this, and they write it all down and go, okay, here's our RACI or here's our DACI. Everybody buy into it? Great, let's go do it. They haven't bought into it. They haven't been involved in the process. They don't know what's going on there, right? So it will ultimately fail,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. To Michelle's earlier question about we've got this in place, but it's not working.
Yeah,
right?
who put it there, right? Who put it there and who bought into it, right? And understand that won't be easy, right? There will be pushback. There will be folks that feel threatened, and you will need to provide some answers to folks about what's in it for me, right? And oftentimes it's senior management that feels the most threatened by this process, right? Because suddenly, part of the role here is you want to push the A's on both sides down to the organization as far as possible. And that scares some senior managers, right? So you're going to need to communicate upwards as well as outwards as you start to implement some of these things.
Absolutely, yeah, and patience is crucial, right? So you're going to go over the prioritized bullets now.
What's that?
Are you going to go over those prioritized points?
Yeah. We will, right? Yeah. So you do need to prioritize, right? As I said, that final process could take a while. So don't be afraid to implement with some of your most broken processes or decisions first, right? Maybe on an ad hoc basis before this entire activity is complete. And as I said, make sure you're communicating and getting buy-in from those groups in the organization that you feel might be the most difficult to convince. And as I said, a lot of times that's senior management, right? That they're the tough ones.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And be agile, right? You don't have to finish the whole thing before you start to implement some of these things, right? Pick pieces of your organization or pieces of the activity that you actually want to attack first, get those implemented, and then start to move the others. That being said, it's a process that I think will benefit your PM team and your whole organization. It'll clarify roles. It'll clarify decision making. And it's, if you're going to do it, it's worth doing right, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. You're right. It is agile is a good idea, a good point to make, right? It's going to need to be iterative. You're not going to completely boil the ocean at first. You're going to tackle the tougher challenges and then iterate.
Yep. All right. So we've got a gift, right? That we're going to share for folks.
Yeah.
So we've actually created a template for this. Come on. Here we go. And we'll make that available after we'll send it to all the folks that are on the call, and they'll get it. And there's a first worksheet, if you will, that has some of the instructions for how to fill this thing out. And then in the other ones, there's actually a RACI template and then a DACI template, so you can actually fill it out for each of those with definition of what each of the acronyms make. And we've actually filled in some constructs and concepts around some of the processes that you'd put in here. These are a starting point. These are some of the ones that at least we've thought of as ones that folks often have to think about from a role definition standpoint of who does what and where they do what. Don't feel you have to use these. And sometimes there might be sub processes or, supporting tasks for the main task, if you will. Feel free to add rows and those kind of things. And on the other side, we've actually put in the roles of, the roles we think are involved. That may change for your organization. Feel free to put in columns and those kind of things for those.
Right.
And then just basically put your C's, your A's, your R's, your A's, your C's, your I's, or your D's, your A's, your C's, your I's, depending on which template you're using. And then share it with folks, right? Make sure people are bought into them. Make sure folks agree with some of them have, and feel free to iterate around some of those processes as well.
Yeah, get input multiple times, take feedback, and you're going to have to evolve this to get everybody to buy in. That's a big part of getting that buy-in. That's been a question that we've had several times about how do I get buy-in, right?
Yeah.
It's going to require compromise and iteration.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to pull together a straw man on this one, and then let people throw arrows at it and continue to evolve and enhance it over time.
Yes, absolutely.
So everybody will get a copy of that one.
Yep, we'll include a link to that in the follow-up email. So let's wrap up and we can answer some more questions, right?
There we go. Yeah. Are we back to where I want to be?
Yep.
All right, cool. Awesome. All right, so it's time. Thanks everybody for this, and I think we have about 10 minutes available for questions that may have come up during the process. Do we ask this first, Raj, the poll?
I'm going to ask the poll and get that going, and we'll answer questions while people are filling out this final question. So one of the questions was about the spreadsheet that we just showed, so we can knock this one off first. And if you don't mind, Kenny, I'll just answer it quickly.
Sure, no problem.
How do you use the pain points column in your RACI DACI template? And really, and Kenny, tell me if you have a different idea about this, but my thought was this is one where you prioritize, right? You go through your first pass on either RACI or DACI, and then you put a number in the pain points, and like the ones are the bleeding chest wounds that probably need to be paid attention to first, whereas the twos come next and the threes later on. So use that pain points column to really point out where it's just not clear in RACI what roles and responsibilities are, or it's just really not clear how we're making a decision. Use the pain points column to kind of prioritize which ones you want to go after first.
Yeah, I think you got it right. You got it right on the nail. Hit the nail right on the head on that one, Raj. I think, yeah. Use that for your prioritization, prior 1, prior 2, prior 3 kind of things, and then focus on the ones. Make sure people bought into those.
Excellent. So another question that we had a lot of is the relationship with executive management. There was one in particular I wanted to talk about, but I'll have to go find it in a second because I really wanted to read it verbatim. But in general, how do you get buy-in from execs on this? And I'll let you start answering that one while I look for the specific example somebody had.
Yeah, I think a couple of things there. One is make sure they're informed that the process is happening, right, in the first place, and that make sure they understand that the reason you're doing this is here are the problems that are happening. Here's where we think we're running into problems. And then involve them in the process, right? Get their opinion, get their thoughts, let them fill out their own sheet on how they think it ought to be done, and then work with them and explain to them why maybe that's not the right way to do things, right? If the executive team has all the A's, here's going to be the result of that happening, right? We're going to be sitting there twiddling our thumbs while you all decide on things.
What are the consequences, right? Yeah. So here was the one I wanted to read. Any recommendation on an executive member who doesn't have an A, but assumes it for every project? How to give the real A person that actual accountability?
Yeah, I think it's part of it is communicating to that exec that, Johnny's got the ball on this one, right? And if you want to take the ball from Johnny, go talk to him about it. But we're going to listen to Johnny on this and not you. He's got the ability to make it happen.
I think the other one is to your earlier point, the further down you push decisions in an organization, the more data is going to be involved in making that decision more effective. And that's another appealing aspect for executives, to push down decisions so that they see that the decision gets closer to all of the information that's available, right? Yeah. So that's another way of doing it. Last thing I'd say on that one is comfort level. it may take time, and you actually have to kind of like give a smaller decision to someone, let that decision play out. Hopefully everyone sees that that was a good result. And over time, that executive will feel more and more comfortable letting go of this assuming of the A role all the time, right?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of questions, Kenny. We're not going to answer them all. We'll try to answer a few of them. Let's see. In most of the companies I've been working for, the difference made between PO and PM was related to the number of backlogs. A PO owned one backlog while the PM owned more, and yet was responsible for multiple product owners. Sometimes we have a hierarchical relationship. What do you think of this?
It sounds scary from my standpoint, because what you've done is you've just overloaded the product manager, if you will, of, oh, they're just a good product manager, so we'll give them more backlogs and more products to deal with, and less to be informed of it. It's better to, should we have another product owner to handle some of those other backlogs and let the product manager and essentially own all of those backlogs in support of a specific product or initiative, if you will.
Yeah, I think that might be what they were saying. This was from Fatima Zahra, and I hope that's what they were saying, that there is a product owner for each backlog, and then the PM is over several POs. That's actually a best practice.
That works fine. That works great.
That is a best practice. And if that's what you're talking about, yes, we fully endorse that approach. I hope that's what they were talking about. Can you speak to best practices splitting PM versus PO in instances where there are no dedicated Scrum Masters, and the PO is therefore acting in that role as well?
Oh. I hate it when POs have to be Scrum Masters too.
Yeah.
It happens, but definitely not a best practice, if you will.
Yeah, that's for sure. But in terms of when that is the case, then the PM, what I would suggest there is the PM really has to be thoughtful about how much work they're putting on the PO. Can they take some of that responsibility back? Like maybe they do spend a little more time providing more of the detail, at least at the epic or feature level, in what they're helping out with. Like I like to think PMs are writing epics, but then POs are writing features and user stories, or working with the whole team to make that happen. And so the more the PM can lean in a little bit there, but again, the PM has got to be the one looking outside, making sure they understand customer needs. And the better job they do there, the less rework there's going to have to be. So
well, I think you start with that shared responsibility, and you say, well, PM now owns all of that shared responsibility components that we had over there, right? Those things that have to be decided. And then to your point, yeah, what else can the PM do to help the PO and enable them to really be that Scrum coach that they have to be if they really want to be the Scrum Master? Right.
Somebody asked.
And the other thing I would do is try to get the PO to start to work closely with the development team to see if they can have certain folks within the development team take on certain roles of that Scrum Master. Hey, or at least on a part-time basis, hey, can you run this Scrum for me, right? And start to empower the product owner, if you will, to start push some of those Scrum Master responsibilities on to more senior folks in the development team.
Right. Yep. So we answered the questions about how realistic is it for a single person to be PMPO. We kind of talked a little bit about that. Let's see what else we have here. So many questions. Oh, should the PO report to the PM?
I've seen it work both ways, right? And there isn't necessarily a best practice. It's going to depend on the PMs and the POs, and how they work together, and whether you have the bandwidth, to the extent that, and a lot depends on the breadth of responsibility of the PM at that point, right? Because there's a responsibility for managing another employee,
right?
And are your PMs capable of doing that? Do you want to give them that responsibility and some of that learning and organizational responsibility, if you will, to do it? So it can result in a lot of factors, and it's not necessarily best practice, yay or nay. Just watch workloads, and think about how you can reward and train and empower your employees in that process.
Yeah, the one thing I like about it when a PO says it's still in the engineering organization and PM is still maybe in marketing or they're in a product organization, is that independence can also help make that relationship a healthy one where there's a little bit of push and pull. Whereas a PO who reports to a PM may feel less likely to vocalize when they feel like, wait a minute, what about this, right? So there are give and takes in both circumstances, right?
Yeah, I get it.
There was a quick question that is there a similar chart for the responsibilities of product manager versus product marketing manager, like the one we showed for PM versus PO? Actually, we have a blog post on that. So Crystal, we will send that blog post link out in the email that we send out. So that'll help you in dividing out those responsibilities. Well,
Yep.
we have a lot more questions, and so maybe Kenny will try to write them up in a follow-up blog if you're up for that. But thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today. Look for the email that will include the link. Why don't you advance the slide too?
Yeah, I will. There we go.
We've got some online courses coming up that still have seats available. If you're looking at the broad perspective of product management, then you might be interested in optimal product management. If you're in a digital product management role, then we've got seats still open in these upcoming digital product management courses. And later this month, in the theme of International Women's Month, we will have a panel discussion about how women can unleash their leadership potential in product management. So sign up for that one today. Nicole will be putting links, if she hasn't already, into the chat box for you to sign up. And been a really great conversation. Thank you so much, Kenny. And thanks everyone who participated.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, so have a great day, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care, folks.
Bye-bye.